There's a recurring theme of architecture and building right throughout Masonic symbolism. So how does this metaphor of building apply to our own personal development? Well, in this episode of Daily Masonic Progress, we're going to take a look at this metaphor and really try and understand why it's so prevalent across Freemasonry. But first, in order to understand this metaphor, we need to really look at some of the history of Freemasonry, as our craft has evolved from actual stonemasons guilds who built cathedrals and castles in medieval times, and it was these operative masons that transformed their physical craft into philosophical teachings. And the tools and the elements and all the different things around them became symbols for both moral and spiritual development. Every mason progresses through 3 degrees: the apprentice, fellow craft, and master mason, where each degree has its own set of lessons and symbols. And each of those lessons and symbols build upon each other, just like learning an actual craft. In the first degree, you're introduced to the idea of the rough ashlar, which is the unworked stone. And that represents us in our natural state or uninitiated self. You then, as you progress, are introduced to the perfect ashlar, which is the finished stone, and that represents the development of ourself. We also have the lodge itself, representing the company that built King Solomon's temple, and the different officers in the lodge are representative of the different people that were involved. For example, the master of the lodge is King Solomon, supported by the senior warden representing King Hiram of Tyre, and then the junior warden representing Hiram of Biff. King Solomon's temple and the building of that temple being such a divine structure provides us this overarching metaphor of being operative masons working on the building of that temple. Then, as we've evolved from operative into, say, speculative or philosophical Freemasonry, every mason is considered to be building their own temple of character. And this building process is considered to be lifelong and perpetual. The work is both internal, being spiritual and moral, and external, being our actions and our behavior. And across Freemasonry, all of the different symbols have both an operative or a physical meaning, as well as a speculative or philosophical meaning that we derive those lessons and instructions and practices from. But in modern context, these building metaphors continue to resonate in everyday life. Personal development is seen as an architectural process where the emphasis is on a gradual and methodical improvement. And there is also stressing of having the important tools and resources and methods to improve ourselves, and thus build the metaphorical temple. So now with this in mind, when we explore how these architectural metaphors apply to personal development, we're really talking about a systematic approach to character building that's been refined over centuries. Many enter Freemasonry believing that by becoming a Mason, it's going to add to their character, only to realize that as they go through the initiation ceremony, that in order to build something up, you must first tear it down. And this initial shock of humbling yourself and the self-reflection that it takes to leave who you are, what you've achieved, and what you've come into possession of from the normal and everyday world doesn't matter once you enter the door. We're then also encouraged to identify our outdated or our imperfections inside of our own character and our behaviors. But the initiation ceremony also gives us the courage that in order to build something great, we first need to start with a strong foundation. And what this teaches is that demolition isn't destruction. Rather, it's preparation of the foundation and preparing that in a way that is so much stronger so that when you do build upon it, you can achieve something that is perfect in all of its parts and honorable to the builder. And the builder there is symbolic of our divine creator, whichever that is of our own chosen religion. Now, speaking of foundations, let's explore what becomes the cornerstone of this new construction. Every master builder knows that when it comes to building a superstructure, the cornerstone determines the integrity of the entire structure. If the cornerstone isn't placed right, the whole thing can be pretty much doomed from the beginning. So one of the main lessons that we're taught inside of Freemasonry is to identify our true cornerstone beliefs and to set them on the foundation. And these are given in the form of our grand principles of brotherly love, relief, and truth. We also then face a struggle. You see, it's the challenge that we face between our old values and our new values. You see, we've grown up in the world, we've identified and come to believe certain things, and we have had these values instilled in us. Freemasonry then provides a new set of values and gives some very strict principles as to how to behave when you're working. But the role of divine architecture in personal construction is also reinforced. Whilst every Mason is free to choose his own religion, it then reinforces the role that the divine creator, our own personal deities, has in our construction as human beings. And finally, we're taught to then recognize that our most painful sacrifices, often the shedding of all of these external things that we use to justify who we are as a human being, and sacrificing those for the greater good in terms of who we can become, actually then become our strongest supports and our pillars. Now, while laying the cornerstone is crucial, it can also create unexpected waves. You see, no significant building project goes unopposed, especially when it challenges the existing landscape. As individuals, we can face internal resistance patterns, and it comes from the fact that we perhaps need to change our habits. We need to acknowledge that the way we have done things in the past is not going to transform us into the person we want to become in the future. And the old self and the new self are continually battling with each other. Yes, we are going to make mistakes. Yes, we're going to be put in uncomfortable positions. And when I mean uncomfortable, I mean stretched in a way that we didn't think was possible, such as public speaking. But then we also face external opposition. You see, when we go and then deploy some of these new values, like when we go and deploy these new values in our day-to-day life, such as having integrity, saying what you do, and some of the lessons are that as a Master Mason, you can correct others. And what that doesn't mean is that you tell people that they're wrong. It means that you hold them to account. And when we're in a society where not everyone has these same strong moral foundations, you are going to have external opposition, especially when it comes to doing the right thing. And we're given the working tools across each of the 3 degrees as ways to teach us to help manage the resistance that we're going to face internally and externally. But the thing that we need to remember is that resistance isn't an obstacle. It's actually confirmation that we're building something meaningful. Because if it isn't hard, or if it isn't difficult, or if we don't have that struggle, well, it means it's not worth doing. And anything worth doing shouldn't come easy, because the easier it comes, the less value that it has. So now that you've mastered how to handle your own resistance, both internally and externally, you're going to begin to notice others that face similar challenges. You see, there's a profound moment when a builder realizes that their own construction site has become a teaching ground for others. And from a pure operative sense, that can simply mean that the workers that you start with have learnt new things, or you've hired apprentices at the start of the project who, when it finishes, are now fully qualified tradesmen. But this also helps us to recognize patterns in other people's struggles. You see, we need to reflect on the personal and unfinished work that others face. There's a line in the address to the wardens at the installation ceremony that goes, "What you see praiseworthy in others, you should carefully imitate, and what appears defective in them, you yourself should amend." And what this phrase is teaching is that when we see things or see good qualities in other people, we should take from that, we should observe and learn as to how they go about employing these good qualities so that we can do them too and add them to our building that we're constructing. But the dual nature of that phrase is when something appears defective, it is really something that is not defective in them, but is a reflection of what is defective within ourselves. You see, to give an example, I have observed a brother who is perhaps in my view, too cautious about the criticism of others. Now, in my view, I think he's being too cautious, but that's because when I reflect on this, I realize that I'm too carefree in not considering the potential criticisms of others. And such, when I do things, because I'm not being mindful of what people might criticize, I am then end up being criticized for it because I haven't tried to mitigate risks or potential criticisms that, had I actually considered during the way I went about what I was doing, I would have been able to mitigate them and actually produce a higher quality outcome. Now, the lesson here is not that I think a particular brother is overly cautious about one particular thing or does something what I think is in too much excess. The reason why it's seen as excess is because it's something that's lacking in myself. To give an example that I think we can all understand, when we see someone who is perhaps really happy in their job and they're having a great time, everything just seems to be going well and they're super successful, that exacerbates all of the things in our own role, in our own job, that we don't feel successful for, that we feel unfulfilled with. So the more we see something in others is really just highlighting how prevalent that issue is in ourselves. It's that law of exaggeration or exponential reflection. But the other thing that goes into this construction site is the dual role of student and teacher. You see, there are always going to be teachers in our lives, and they can be official teachers where we go to a class, but they can be unofficial teachers or mentors. Like, for example, the brother I just gave who is overly cautious about criticism. I use the way he tries to mitigate criticism when we're undergoing specific work as someone who is teaching me how to then get better at that myself. And this isn't a formal relationship. It is me utilizing that line from the address to the wardens of what appears defective to then teach me how to improve that in my own life. The other aspect of the dual role of student and teacher is that we ourselves need to be students of how to teach, because we might understand it one particular way, but to develop true knowledge and true understanding of something, we need to be able to teach it to others. Using that teaching process where we learn how to teach something to many different people forms a deeper understanding and deeper quality of knowledge and wisdom within ourselves. And what this leads us to understand is that mentorship is a two-way mirror of growth. It's not just a one way of someone teaching you or instructing you or guiding you. It is that two-way mirror that we need to be observant of what is good in others and to then imitate that, but what we see as defective to then correct in ourselves. And this perhaps brings us to the most challenging phase of any construction. You see, every master mason carries within them a room that remains perpetually under construction. It's the owner-builder paradox. If you've ever seen an electrician or a tradesman, it's always their own house or their own electrical work, their own plumbing, their own building that remains under construction. Or a software engineer, it's a personal software project that just never gets finished, but others' work always does. But this room that is perpetually under construction is teaching us to identify what the current challenge is. And it remains under construction because we have this fear that if we end up completing it, well, we're done. There's nothing more that comes after that. So it then removes from us perhaps the purpose to continue to strive for one day I'm going to complete it. This fails to acknowledge the Creator's greater plan for each of us. And it teaches us that only by accepting that we need to work towards completing that unfinished room do we then unlock the ability to actually achieve our greatest potential for growth. So now we turn to the external question. What will you build next? In the end, Master Masons often speak of becoming the temple rather than just building it. And it's for our own journey of demolition or humbling, refinement, cornerstone laying, facing and overcoming resistance, mentoring others and being mentored by them. And it's confronting your unfinished chambers and working towards finishing them. And it is how this transformation changes not just what you're building, but how you're building it and who you fundamentally are and become, both as a builder